When you open a diary, you don't just read the words, it reads you. Julia's discovery of an old diary in the abandoned Whitaker mansion turns her life into a living nightmare. Shadows, whispers, and deadly secrets collide, pulling you into a horror story that will leave you breathless. Brace yourself. Once the diary is opened, nothing will ever be the same. It was a bitterly cold October evening in the small town of Ravenwood, Maine. The wind howled through the skeletal trees surrounding the Whitaker estate, and the old house seemed to shiver with each gust. Julia Hart, a young graduate student from Boston, had always been fascinated by local legends. Ravenwood, with its fog-laden streets and tales of haunted mansions, had drawn her like a moth to a flame. She stepped cautiously into the Whitaker attic, guided only by the flickering light of her flashlight. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling like tiny spirits disturbed from their slumber. The attic was cluttered with decades of abandoned furniture, broken trunks, and yellowed papers. Julia's heart raced. The town's rumors about the Whitaker family had always fascinated her, especially the story of the last descendant, Edward Whitaker, who mysteriously vanished in 1923, leaving behind whispers of a cursed diary. Her fingers grazed the spines of ancient books until she found a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets. The cover was cracked, and the leather was worn smooth from years of handling. An ominous chill ran down her spine as she opened it. The handwriting inside was elegant but hasty, almost frantic, describing a series of dreams that quickly turned nightmarish. Julia read aloud, her voice trembling. "I saw them last night. Their eyes, black as coal, staring from the shadows. I can hear them whispering, calling my name. But when I turn, nothing is there. They are patient, waiting." A sudden gust of wind rattled the attic windows, and Julia jumped. The words on the page seemed to writhe before her eyes, and for a moment, she thought she heard a whisper echo through the empty room. "Don't read, or they will come." Shaking off the feeling, she decided to take the diary with her. She didn't believe in curses, at least, not in the ordinary sense, but something about the diary felt alive. When she descended the narrow, creaking stairs back to the main floor, she felt as if unseen eyes were tracking her every move. That night, Julia sat in her rented Ravenwood apartment, the diary open on her lap. The streetlights outside flickered in rhythm with her racing heart. She began to read more, uncovering Edward Whitaker's descent into paranoia. Each entry described shadows moving where they shouldn't, whispers at impossible hours, and the sensation of being watched by unseen presences. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, the air in her apartment grew icy. The candle on her desk flickered and died, leaving her in darkness. A low, almost inaudible whisper slithered through the room. "Julia." She froze. Her rational mind screamed that it was the wind, a trick of her imagination. But the sound came again, closer this time, dripping with intent. "Julia, read the rest." The diary felt heavier in her hands, as if it were anchoring her to the room. The shadows in the corner seemed to thicken, coalescing into shapes that her mind refused to fully register. She tried to set the book aside, but her fingers wouldn't release it. The pages flipped on their own, landing on an entry dated the night Edward disappeared. "They are patient and clever. They will wait for you, and when the night is right, they will claim you too." Julia's pulse thundered in her ears. The candle's flame flickered back to life, casting a weak glow over the room, but she wasn't alone. A cold, wet sensation brushed against her arm, like a whispering hand, and the shadows in the corner of her vision shifted, just enough for her to feel watched, hunted, and trapped. For the first time in her life, she questioned the rational world she had always clung to, and as the wind howled outside her window, Julia knew one terrifying truth. The diary wasn't just a record of Edward's fears. It was a beacon, and something was coming. Julia's sleep that night was fractured and uneasy. The diary lay on the small table beside her bed, its presence a silent, oppressive weight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fleeting shadows at the edges of her vision. She told herself it was exhaustion, the stress of moving to a new town, and the thrill of uncovering a mystery. But deep down, a growing dread gnawed at her thoughts. By morning, Julia felt drained, her body tense with invisible tension. She brewed coffee, trying to shake off the lingering nightmare images, but the diary seemed to hum faintly from across the room, as if calling her back. She glanced at the worn leather cover, and a shiver ran down her spine. Something about it wasn't just old, it was alive. Unable to resist, she opened the diary again. The next entries described Edward Whitaker's growing paranoia and his encounters with unseen entities. The whispers are louder tonight. I cannot leave my room. They know I am awake. I hear them pacing outside, scratching at the doors, sighing in the vents. Mother tried to warn me, but she didn't understand. No one ever does. They will come for all who read these pages. Julia paused, the hairs on the back of her neck standing straight. She laughed nervously to herself, whispering, "This is ridiculous. Just old writing. Fiction." But as she read, a whisper slithered through her apartment. "Julia." She froze, her fingers tightening on the diary. The voice was low and insistent, almost beckoning her to move deeper into the shadows. Julia strained to hear, and the whisper came again. "You can't ignore me." Her rational mind screamed at her to leave the room, to throw the diary out the window, to do anything to break this spell. But she was rooted in place, hypnotized by the sinister pull of the words. It wasn't just curiosity that kept her reading. It was something darker, something ancient and insidious that whispered promises of forbidden knowledge. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had begun to feel fluid. The diary's pages twisted beneath her fingers, words changing as she looked at them. Sentences she had read before now described things that were happening in her apartment in real time. The creak of the floorboards outside her door, the soft rustle of her curtains, the heavy breathing that wasn't hers. A sudden crash from the kitchen made her jump. Her apartment was otherwise empty. She fumbled for the flashlight on her desk and shone it toward the doorway. The beam trembled in her hand as it landed on the floor, illuminating a dark shape that seemed to dissolve when she blinked. The air turned icy, her breath forming clouds in front of her. "They're here," the diary whispered, as if echoing the fear in her own heart. Panic surged through her. Julia tried to stand, but her legs refused to obey. Shadows gathered in the corners, writhing like living smoke. From the darkness, a voice murmured, clear and unmistakable, "You cannot leave." The room seemed to stretch, walls bending and groaning as if the apartment itself were alive. The shadows reached toward her, tendrils of black mist curling in slow, deliberate motions. Julia screamed, but no sound emerged, her voice swallowed by the suffocating presence. Desperately, she hurled the diary across the room. It landed with a thud, its pages fluttering open on their own. A gust of wind, impossible, given that all windows were shut, whipped through the apartment, scattering papers and rattling furniture. Julia stumbled back, her eyes wide, and saw words materializing in the air, glowing faintly. "Once you read, you belong to us." Her heart pounded. Her rational mind could no longer deny what she was feeling. Something ancient, patient, and malevolent had marked her, and it was no longer content to stay in the shadows. It wanted her. Julia backed away, but her escape was blocked by the shifting shadows. They moved like liquid, pooling around her feet and rising toward her shoulders. Panic clawed at her chest as the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay and old ink. She wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from what she hoped was a nightmare, but the diary's power held her in place, tethering her to the dark truth Edward had known. The moment you read, "You are never alone again." And in the darkness, the whispers grew louder, echoing inside her skull. "We are patient. We are inevitable. You cannot hide." Julia realized, with a sinking horror, that the diary had not just recorded Edward's fear, it had created it. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Julia awoke with a start, drenched in cold sweat, her apartment eerily silent. The diary lay on the floor beside her bed, its leather cover glinting faintly in the dim light of dawn. She wanted to convince herself that the previous night had been a nightmare. But the heavy, oppressive feeling in the room told her otherwise. Her hands trembled as she reached for her coffee mug, but even the familiar weight of ceramic felt strange. Every shadow seemed thicker, almost tangible, pressing against the corners of her vision. Her phone lay dead on the nightstand, the screen black despite repeated attempts to charge it. It was as if the diary had claimed her world, cutting off every lifeline she had. Julia's curiosity warred with her terror. She knew she should destroy the diary, leave it in a public place, or even call someone for help. But something darker held her. She opened the journal, and the words seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, inviting her into the horrors Edward had once lived. I saw them today, closer than ever. They do not need doors, nor walls. They are everywhere, yet nowhere. Their touch is like cold fire, burning and freezing at once. I cannot tell reality from the dream, for they follow me even when I close my eyes. A sudden crash from the kitchen made her jump. The apartment was silent except for the whispers that had begun again, threading through the air like serpents. "Julia, you belong to us." Heart racing, she grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the source. Her fingers brushed against a wall, and she noticed something strange, faint scratches, almost claw-like, leading to the kitchen. Her pulse pounded. She knew rationally that it couldn't be real, but every fiber of her being screamed that it was. She stepped into the kitchen and froze. On the floor, footprints, barely human, elongated and dark, led to the pantry. Her flashlight flickered as a cold wind blew through the room, though every window and door remained shut. The diary had warned her. Then she saw it. A shadow, taller than any human, hunched in the corner of the pantry. Its form was indistinct, constantly shifting, but Julia could feel its gaze piercing her. A low, guttural hiss filled the room, vibrating through her chest. She stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, and landed hard on the wooden floor. The shadow moved closer, and Julia felt an icy pressure against her back, as if the air itself had weight. She screamed, finally breaking the silence of her apartment, but her voice seemed to vanish before it reached the walls. The only sound was the whispering, circling her, taunting her. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You are ours now." Frantically, Julia crawled toward the front door, fumbling with the lock. But the shadows thickened, and the floor beneath her seemed to pulse, sending ripples through the wood as if the apartment itself were alive. She glanced over her shoulder, and the figure loomed closer, its edges blurred, yet undeniably present. Desperation surged. In a last, frantic move, she hurled the diary toward the shadow. The moment it landed, the figure recoiled with a violent hiss, retreating into the corner. The air lightened slightly, but the oppressive presence remained. Julia collapsed onto the floor, panting, tears streaming down her face. She finally understood the depth of Edward Whitaker's terror. The diary was not merely a record, it was a conduit, and the entities it chronicled were now aware of her. As the sun rose, Julia realized with growing dread that the shadows did not vanish with daylight. They lingered, stretching and writhing in the corners, watching, waiting. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought formed, a chilling premonition. They would return tonight, stronger, closer, hungrier, and she would have nowhere to hide. Night fell like a velvet curtain over Ravenwood, and Julia's apartment became a chamber of living shadows. Every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed magnified, as if the very air was conspiring against her. She had barricaded the doors and windows, stacked chairs and tables against them, but deep down, she knew nothing could stop what was coming. The diary sat on the desk, its cover now glossy, almost wet with some unnatural sheen. Julia's hand shook as she approached it. She had to know more, had to understand what she was dealing with, though every rational part of her screamed to burn it, throw it into the river, or bury it far from her reach. As she opened it, the candlelight flickered violently, casting giant, writhing shadows on the walls. The pages told of Edward Whitaker's last days, the nights when the whispers became voices, the shadows became claws, and the unseen entities finally revealed themselves in forms that no human mind should ever comprehend. They are patient, patient beyond reason. They wait for fear, feed on attention. Tonight, they come closer. Tonight, the veil is thin. Julia's blood ran cold. She realized that the diary didn't just describe Edward's experiences, it predicted them. And tonight, she was living the prophecy. The whispering began softly at first, curling around her ears like icy smoke. "Julia, Julia, come to us." The voice was seductive, beckoning, filled with a promise of secrets and horrors. Julia tried to block it out, covering her ears, but the whisper seeped into her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. Then movement caught her eye. The shadows along the walls began to twist unnaturally, stretching into shapes vaguely human, yet grotesque and wrong. One of them detached itself from the corner, moving toward her with deliberate, slow steps. Its form was a void of darkness, punctuated by glinting points that might have been eyes, or reflections of her own terror. Julia backed away, her heels scraping the hardwood. The apartment felt impossibly large, hallways stretching into darkness that should not exist. She ran toward the kitchen, but the shadow anticipated her every movement, gliding silently across the floor, phasing through obstacles as if they were illusions. In a moment of desperation, Julia grabbed a knife from the counter and slashed at the approaching darkness. The blade passed through it, meeting resistance like cutting through smoke and ice at once. The shadow recoiled with a sound like metal screeching, then surged again, faster this time, tendrils of cold wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down. She screamed, but no sound escaped her throat. The candle toppled, extinguishing with a wet sizzle, leaving her in pitch black. The whispering escalated into a chorus of voices, overlapping, chanting, hissing. "You belong to us. You cannot escape. We are patient. We are inevitable." Julia fought, kicking, clawing, thrashing, but the shadows pulled her toward the center of the room. And then, the impossible happened. The diary floated off the desk, pages flipping rapidly as if possessed. Words glowed briefly in a ghostly light. "Fear binds the reader. Fear opens the door. Tonight we dine." The cold tendrils tightened, freezing her to the floor. And then she saw them, not as shadows, but as fully formed entities. Tall, thin, and impossibly dark. Their faces featureless, but for hollow pits that seemed to absorb light itself. They leaned over her, whispering incoherent secrets that tore at her sanity. Julia's mind spiraled. The apartment had become a world of darkness and whispers, a trap without walls, without escape. She understood with horrifying clarity that Edward's disappearance was no accident. These entities did not just haunt, they consumed, absorbed, erased. And now she was on the menu. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in a torturous blur. Julia's vision began to flicker between reality and nightmare. Every attempt to move, to fight, only drew the shadows closer. And then, when she felt she could endure no more, the whispering stopped. The shadows froze mid-motion, as if listening, waiting. A new voice emerged, soft but commanding, separate from the chorus. "Read the next page. Only then can you know, or survive." Julia's trembling hand reached for the diary. She hated it. She feared it. And yet she obeyed. Tonight, the boundary between her world and the nightmare had shattered. And she understood one bone-chilling truth. The diary was not merely cursed, it was alive, and it had claimed her as its vessel. Julia's trembling fingers hovered over the diary, the candlelight flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost sentient. The whispering had subsided for the first time that night, leaving her alone with the journal and the oppressive silence of her apartment. But she knew better than to trust the calm. The diary had never allowed peace. It had only promised the next wave of terror. With a deep, shuddering breath, Julia opened to a page she hadn't yet reached, the first page after Edward Whitaker's final entry. The handwriting was different, older, almost indecipherable, as if another hand had taken control of the diary after Edward vanished. "I, who bind this world and the next, have chosen the vessel. The reader's fear is the key, their attention the door. Once touched, the curse flows freely, seeking, waiting. Beware the ink, for it is blood of the forgotten. Beware the words, for they whisper truths man was not meant to know. Julia's skin crawled. The diary wasn't just a record of past horrors. It was a manual, a declaration from the entity or entities that controlled it. She read on, the words forming a narrative of obsession, ritual, and dark magic that transcended centuries. Edward Whitaker had not simply been haunted. He had been chosen, drawn into a pact with forces beyond comprehension. The diary had chronicled the events leading to his disappearance, but also served as a lure for the next victim, Julia herself. Every page was a trap, every sentence a chain. The veil thins with each reader. The shadows grow bold, the whispers precise. By morning, the vessel knows its fate. By nightfall they come. Her pulse quickened. Julia realized that the diary had orchestrated the previous night's terrors. The whispers, the shadows, even the cold. None of it was random. Each event had been engineered to break her resistance, to make her comply, to ensure she would read further and deeper. A sudden realization struck her. Edward's disappearance was not death in the traditional sense. He had been absorbed, his essence merged with the shadows, feeding the entities that had written the curse into existence. The diary was both prison and gateway, a sentient artifact designed to propagate fear and draw souls into its collection. Julia's hands shook as she skimmed the next entries. They described rituals Edward had attempted to resist the curse, desperate measures to escape, all of which failed. He had tried burning the diary, but the flames died without consuming a single page. He had tried throwing it into the sea, only for it to reappear, dry and intact, at the Whitaker estate. He had even attempted to hide it, but the diary had a will of its own, always returning to the one it sought. A chill swept the room as the whispering began anew, softer now, almost coaxing. You see now. You understand. But understanding is not enough. Julia realized the horrifying truth. Knowledge alone would not save her. The diary demanded compliance. It demanded fear. It demanded attention. And if she faltered, even for a second, the entities would claim her, as they had Edward. With trembling determination, she considered her options. Could she destroy it? Could she escape? Could she even leave the apartment without inviting the shadows to follow her into the streets of Ravenwood? The diary's curse was not bound by walls, doors, or daylight. It was an omnipresent threat, and she was tethered to it. Her gaze fell on the last sentence on the page, written in a hurried, jagged hand. The only way to survive is to uncover the truth hidden within the ink. Only the reader who understands may bargain. Only understanding may delay the inevitable. Understanding. Julia realized she had to delve deeper, confront the diary's secrets fully, no matter the cost. There was no turning back. She could feel the shadows tightening their invisible grip, watching, waiting, pressing against her mind even now. As the wind howled outside, rattling the windows and shaking the doorframe, Julia took a deep breath and whispered to herself, I have to know. I have to face it. The diary pulsed faintly, almost approvingly, as if it recognized her resolve. But somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of her candlelight, the shadows stirred with renewed hunger. Julia knew, with absolute certainty, that the night ahead would be the most dangerous yet, and she had only just begun to uncover the secrets of the Whitaker curse. Night had deepened into a suffocating black, pressing against Julia's apartment like an invisible hand. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the faint scent of ink, dust, and something far older, far more malevolent. Julia gripped the diary tightly, her knuckles white, and steeled herself. She had spent days, or perhaps only hours. Time had become meaningless, learning the truth, preparing for the inevitable. The shadows were patient. They had been lingering, coiling in corners, slipping under doors, and whispering at every turn. But now, they moved with intent, circling her like predators sensing fear. Their shapes were fluid, amorphous, yet undeniably aware of her presence. She could feel their gaze piercing her very soul. You cannot hide, the whispers hissed, soft yet powerful, echoing inside her skull. You have read. You are ours. Julia's pulse thundered, but she refused to succumb to panic. She remembered the diary's final instructions. Understanding may delay the inevitable. She had read. She had comprehended the curse. Perhaps, just perhaps, knowledge could be her shield. The shadows surged forward, responding to her hesitation, but she held her ground. "I will not be consumed," she shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. The entities paused, their formless edges quivering. Julia opened the diary and read aloud the passage Edward had marked with frantic underlines. "Fear feeds them, attention binds them, but courage, fleeting though it may be, can slow the tide. Speak to them, name them, confront them. Show no terror." Her voice rang out into the apartment, echoing against the walls as she forced herself to speak the names she could feel but not see. The shadows, the watchers, the forgotten. "I see you. I know you. I am not afraid of you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted, her breath forming clouds in the dim candlelight. The shadows recoiled, twisted violently, and a guttural chorus of whispers erupted. "Foolish vessel, you cannot escape." Julia pressed on, reading the diary's ritual aloud, an incantation of comprehension and acknowledgement, a declaration that she recognized the power of the curse but would not submit blindly. The words trembled in her mouth, heavy with the weight of centuries of fear, yet she forced herself to continue. The shadows lunged, tendrils snaking toward her, but she met each advance with steady words, each line of the ritual like a shield repelling their grasp. For every tendril that brushed her skin, she named it, acknowledged it, and pushed back with her voice. Her fear tried to claw its way back, but she rooted herself in comprehension, in knowledge, and for the first time, she felt the faintest shift in the oppressive darkness. The air cracked with tension, the apartment groaning as if reality itself were bending. The shadows shrieked, twisting into grotesque shapes, eyes gleaming like black embers. They pressed closer, yet Julia stood firm, reading, naming, confronting. She could feel her strength waning, her voice faltering, but she forced herself onward. Then a sudden silence fell. The shadows froze, edges blurring, tendrils retreating. The room felt impossibly still, almost as if the apartment itself were holding its breath. The diary glowed faintly, pages fluttering as if alive, acknowledging her defiance. For the first time, Julia realized something profound. The curse was not invincible. It fed on fear, yes, but courage, however small, however fleeting, could carve a space of safety, a temporary reprieve. The entities were patient, but they were not omnipotent. Still, Julia knew the confrontation was only a beginning. The diary pulsed with latent energy, a reminder that while she had survived this night, the curse remained, waiting, watching, anticipating. One misstep, one flicker of terror, and the shadows would return stronger, hungrier, more relentless. Breathing heavily, Julia sank to the floor. The diary clutched to her chest. For now, she had endured. For now, she had proven that she could confront the darkness and remain whole. But she knew, deep in her bones, that the final chapter, the ultimate reckoning, was still to come. And somewhere beyond the edges of the room, the shadows whispered promises of the night to come. "Soon, Julia. Soon, you will see the truth in full." The night was blacker than ever, as if the moon itself had been swallowed. Julia's apartment had transformed into a realm where reality twisted like smoke, shadows pooling in impossible shapes, whispering incessantly in the language of fear. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum of doom, every breath thick with icy dread. She clutched the diary tightly, feeling the pulse of its malevolence through the leather-bound cover. The shadows had returned, stronger, faster, more tangible than ever. They surged from every corner, walls bending as they pressed inward, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. Their forms were grotesque, features ever-shifting, eyes that glimmered with hungry anticipation. Julia's resolve wavered, but she remembered the ritual. Understanding, acknowledgement, confrontation. They feed on fear. "I will not give them that," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. The entities hissed, an unholy chorus that reverberated through the apartment. The vessel trembles. The vessel fears. Soon the ink will claim all. Julia opened the diary one final time, eyes scanning the jagged, frantic handwriting of Edward Whitaker's last entry. It was a map, a guide, a ritual not of destruction, but of control. She had learned that while the diary could summon and torment, it could also be bargained with, if the reader possessed courage and clarity. Her hand shook as she recited the ancient words aloud, the syllables tasting of ash and iron. The shadows recoiled, screeching and writhing, yet Julia pressed on, each line of the incantation a tether between herself and the encroaching darkness. She felt the entities probing, testing, clawing at her mind, but she named them, acknowledged their existence, and refused to bow. Suddenly, the diary lifted from her lap, pages spinning in a furious whirlwind of ink and shadow. Words glowed faintly, almost alive. The vessel confronts the eternal. The vessel seeks the truth. Will it endure? Julia's voice cracked, but she did not stop. The shadows lunged, tendrils of darkness curling around her limbs, freezing her to the floor. Panic clawed at her mind, but she drew a deep, shuddering breath and pushed through it, continuing the ritual, invoking names, calling out the truth of the curse. The entity screamed, a sound that shook the apartment to its foundation. The air grew thick, suffocating, and Julia felt herself being pulled toward the center of the room, into the very heart of the darkness. She closed her eyes and imagined light, bright, unyielding, pure, flowing from the diary into her, binding her will to understanding, not fear. When she opened her eyes, the room seemed to stretch and pulse with tension. The shadows convulsed, then slowly began to recede, twisting back into corners, folding in on themselves, as if retreating from something they could not consume. The whispers faded, leaving only a low, distant echo. This is not over. The vessel will be tested again. Julia sank to the floor, her body trembling, the diary resting heavily against her chest. She had survived the night, faced the curse, and wrestled control from the shadows, if only temporarily. She realized the terrifying truth. The diary would always seek new readers, new vessels, new fear, but she had learned that understanding and courage could grant reprieve, even if fleeting. As dawn broke, a weak light filtering through the blinds, Julia stared at the diary. It seemed quiet almost, patient. Its leather cover pulsed faintly, as if aware of her presence. She did not know if it was waiting for another night, another test, or another reader. The city outside of Ravenwood seemed calm, oblivious to the darkness lurking within the apartment. Yet Julia knew better. Somewhere, far beyond her vision, the diary had already begun its search for the next unwitting victim. And deep inside her, a lingering unease remained, a whisper of warning. This is only the beginning. The story continues. Julia rose slowly, determined to learn more, to uncover the diary's mysteries fully, even if it meant walking further into the shadows. She knew one undeniable truth. She was changed forever, and the night had taught her that fear could be met, confronted, and survived, but it never truly vanished. The diary lay open on the floor, awaiting the next chapter, its pages trembling with secrets yet untold. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, a single whisper curled through the room, almost teasing, almost alive. Are you ready for what comes next? Julia's encounter with the shadows and whispers wasn't just a one-night nightmare. The dark secrets of the diary are still out there, waiting, calling for the next reader. Will Julia face the full power of the curse in the nights to come? If you enjoyed this chilling story, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments. Let's discover together what happens next in the upcoming videos.